The gavel had fallen 1,000 times in Evelyn Moore's courtroom, but nothing prepared her for the moment she looked up from the bench and locked eyes with the man who'd knelt in the mud to save her. The air left her lungs, her pulse hammered against her ribs. Because the stranger who'd changed her tire in the rain, the one she'd thought about every night since, was now standing before her, accused of being an unfit father. And she had exactly 3 minutes to decide whether to recuse herself or betray every principle she'd built her career on. If you want to know whether justice can survive when it collides with gratitude, stay with me until the end of this story. And please, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came without warning. One moment, Evelyn Moore was driving through a tunnel of late autumn trees, their branches forming a cathedral of gold and crimson above Route 47. The next, the sky opened like a broken dam, and the world dissolved into sheets of water so thick her wipers couldn't keep pace. She slowed the sedan to a crawl, knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes straining to find the yellow line that separated her from the ditch. She'd been a county judge for 6 years. She'd sentenced men twice her size without flinching. She'd stared down defense attorneys who tried to intimidate her with volume and posture. But this raw, indifferent fury of nature made her feel small in a way no courtroom ever had. The tire blew with a sound like a gunshot. The car lurched violently to the right. Evelyn's heart leapt into her throat as she wrestled the wheel, pumping the brakes, fighting the pull of the shoulder. Gravel sprayed. The sedan fishtailed once, twice, then shuddered to a stop half on the road, half buried in the wet grass. For a long moment she just sat there, hands trembling, rain drumming on the roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "Okay. You're fine. You're fine." But she wasn't fine. She pulled out her phone, no signal. Of course. This stretch of highway cut through state forest, miles from the nearest town. She checked the time. Nearly 7. The sun was already setting behind the storm clouds, and the darkness gathering between the trees felt hungry. Evelyn stepped out into the rain. The cold hit her like a slap. Within seconds, her blazer was soaked through, her hair plastered to her face. She circled to the passenger side and stared down at the tire, completely shredded, rubber peeling away from the rim like dead skin. She'd changed a tire exactly once in her life, 15 years ago, under her father's supervision in a sunny driveway. This was nothing like that. She popped the trunk and stared at the spare, the jack, the lug wrench, all of it foreign and vaguely menacing. Rain pounded her shoulders. Her hands were already numb. She grabbed the jack, knelt in the mud, and tried to remember where it was supposed to go. The metal slipped. Her fingers couldn't grip. Frustration clawed up her throat, and she heard herself make a sound that was half sob, half growl. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "You argue felony cases. You can change a damn tire." But the jack wouldn't cooperate. The rain wouldn't stop, and the darkness was closing in. That's when she saw the headlights. An old pickup truck, rust-colored and battered, slowed as it approached. Evelyn's stomach tightened. This was the part in every horror movie where the lone woman on the highway makes a fatal mistake. But she was also soaked, freezing, and out of options. The truck pulled onto the shoulder behind her car. The engine cut off. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out into the rain. He was tall but not imposing, lean in the way people get when they work hard and eat less. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, jeans stained with old paint, and work boots that had seen better decades. His face was shadowed beneath a baseball cap, but she could see the lines around his eyes, the weariness in his posture. He stopped a respectful distance away, rain streaming off the brim of his cap. "You need a hand?" His voice was quiet, almost apologetic, as if he were the one intruding. Evelyn straightened, mud streaking her skirt, and tried to summon the composure that usually came so easily. Yes, I think so. The tire blew, and I can't get the jack positioned." He nodded once, stepped closer, and knelt beside her car without another word. His movements were efficient, practiced. He positioned the jack beneath the frame, tested it, then began to crank. The car lifted smoothly. Evelyn stood there, dripping, feeling absurdly useless. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't know if anyone would come by." Not many people take this road at night, he said, still working, especially in weather like this. His voice had a texture to it, like gravel smoothed by river water. Not unkind, but worn. I was trying to get home before dark, Evelyn said. I miscalculated. He glanced up at her, just briefly, and she caught a glimpse of his eyes, gray or maybe blue, hard to tell in the dim light. There was no judgment in them, no pity, just quiet acknowledgement. Happens, he said. He removed the shredded tire with quick, sure motions, then lifted the spare from her trunk. It looked heavy, but he handled it like it weighed nothing. Evelyn watched his hands, calloused, scarred in places, the hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime fixing things. Do you live around here? She asked, partly to fill the silence, partly because she was genuinely curious. About 10 miles north, he said, tightening the lug nuts. Heading home from work. What do you do? He paused, just for a second, as if deciding whether to answer. Maintenance. Cleaning crew at the hospital. Night shift. There was no shame in his voice, but no pride either, just fact. That must be hard work, Evelyn said. He shrugged. It's steady, that's what matters. He finished with the last lug nut, lowered the jack, and stood. Rain dripped from his sleeves, his cap, the collar of his shirt. He looked like a man who was used to being wet, used to being cold, used to enduring. You should get that tire replaced soon, he said. The spare's not meant for long distances. I will, first thing tomorrow. Evelyn pulled her wallet from her purse, hands shaking from the cold. Please, let me pay you. You just saved me from— No need, he said, already turning back toward his truck. I insist. You went out of your way. I didn't go out of my way. He stopped, looked back at her. I was already here, and you needed help. There was something in the simplicity of that statement that made her throat tighten. No performance, no expectation, just a man who saw someone in trouble and did what needed doing. At least tell me your name, she said. He hesitated. Caleb. Evelyn. She extended her hand. His handshake was brief, his palm rough against hers. Then he nodded once and walked back to his truck. The engine turned over with a cough, headlights cutting through the rain, and he pulled back onto the highway. Within seconds, the taillights disappeared into the storm. Evelyn stood there for a moment longer, rain streaming down her face, feeling something she couldn't quite name. Then she got back into her car, turned the heat on full blast, and drove home through the rain. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She sat in her apartment, an elegant fourth-floor unit with hardwood floors and windows that overlooked the town square, wrapped in a blanket, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. The rain had followed her home, tapping insistently against the glass. She kept seeing his hands on the lug wrench, the way he'd knelt in the mud without hesitation, the quiet in his voice when he'd said, I was already here. And you needed help. It wasn't attraction exactly. Or maybe it was, but not the kind she'd felt before. It was something deeper, something that had to do with decency and dignity and the recognition of a person who lived by a code she respected. She pulled up her laptop and, almost without thinking, ran a search. Caleb, maintenance, county hospital. Nothing came up. Of course not. He was just a man doing a job, living a life, helping a stranger in the rain. He didn't exist in this world she usually navigated, the world of legal briefs and case files and courtroom transcripts. She closed the laptop, finished her tea, and told herself to let it go. But sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at the courthouse at 7:30, earlier than usual. The building was a squat gray structure that had been old when she was born, retrofitted with modern security, but still smelling faintly of floor wax and old paper. She nodded to the bailiffs, exchanged brief pleasantries with the clerk, and made her way to her chambers. Her calendar was packed. Sentencing hearing at 9, motion to suppress at 10:30, custody hearing at 11:15. She scanned the docket for the custody case, a habit she'd developed early in her career. Turner v. Turner. Mother seeking sole custody, alleging neglect and inability to provide. Father contesting, represented by a public defender. Evelyn sighed. These cases were always the hardest. Not because the law was complicated, but because the lives behind the paperwork were so fragile, so easily broken by a single misstep. She pulled the file and began to read. The mother, Jenna Turner, had filed 3 months ago. She claimed the father, Caleb Turner, had missed multiple scheduled visitations, failed to provide adequate housing, and was frequently absent due to work obligations. There were reports from a social worker, photographs of a small, cluttered apartment, and testimony from a neighbor who described the child as often left alone. Evelyn frowned as she read. The allegations were serious, but they also had a familiar shape, the shape of poverty being mistaken for neglect. She flipped to the father's response. It was brief, filed by a public defender who was probably managing 50 other cases. Caleb Turner admitted to missing visitations due to work conflicts, acknowledged that his apartment was small, but insisted he loved his daughter and was doing everything he could to provide for her. Attached was a single photograph, a little girl, maybe 6 years old, with dark curls and a gap-toothed smile. She was holding a stuffed rabbit. Evelyn stared at the photo for a long moment. Then she turned the page and saw the father's name again. Caleb Turner. Her pulse stuttered. No, it couldn't be. She flipped back to the employment verification form. Maintenance worker, County General Hospital, night shift. The air went out of the room. It was him, the man who'd changed her tire in the rain, the man who'd refused payment, the man whose quiet decency had stayed with her all night. He was the father in this custody case, and she was the judge assigned to decide it. Plus, Evelyn sat very still, her mind racing through a dozen calculations at once. She should recuse herself, immediately. There was no question. A judge who'd had personal contact with a party, even brief, even incidental, had a duty to step aside. It was Ethics 101, but recusal meant delay. It meant this case would be reassigned, shuffled to the back of another judge's docket. It could take weeks, maybe months, and in that time, a little girl's life would be in limbo. She looked at the photograph again, the gap-toothed smile, the stuffed rabbit. Then she looked at the allegations, missed visitations, inadequate housing, frequently absent. She thought about the way Caleb had moved in the rain, tired, worn, but steady. The way he'd said, "It's steady. That's what matters." A man working night shifts at a hospital wasn't absent because he didn't care. He was absent because he was trying to survive. Evelyn closed the file and pressed her fingers to her temples. She had 3 hours until the hearing. 3 hours to decide whether to follow the rules or follow her conscience. At 10:45, she was still sitting in her chambers, staring at the file. There was a knock at the door. Her clerk, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret, poked her head in. "Judge Moore? They're ready for you in courtroom C." Evelyn looked up. "The Turner case?" "Yes, ma'am. Both parties are present." Evelyn's heart kicked hard against her ribs. "Thank you, Margaret. I'll be right there." The door closed. She stood, smoothed her robe, and picked up the file. Her hands were steady. They always were in court, but her mind was a storm. She walked down the hallway, past the portraits of former judges, past the bulletin boards cluttered with legal notices, and into courtroom C. The room was small, plain, designed for hearings rather than trials. The gallery held only a handful of people, a social worker, a neighbor, a woman who must be Jenna Turner. And standing beside the public defender's table, hands clasped in front of him, was Caleb. He looked up as she entered. Their eyes met, and Evelyn saw the exact moment recognition hit him, the widening of his eyes, the slight parting of his lips, the color draining from his face. He knew. She took her seat behind the bench, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. The bailiff called the court to order. Evelyn opened the file, but she couldn't see the words. All she could see was Caleb, standing there in a shirt that was too big for him, looking like a man who'd already lost before the fight even started. She cleared her throat. "Good morning. We're here for the custody matter of Turner v. Turner. Counsel, please state your appearances." The public defender stood. "James Ortega, representing Caleb Turner, Your Honor." A crisp, older woman in a navy suit rose. "Amanda Vickers, representing Jenna Turner, Your Honor." Evelyn nodded. "This is a hearing to determine temporary custody arrangements for—" She glanced at the file. "Lily Turner, age 6, mid. Vickers, you may proceed." And so it began. Amanda Vickers was efficient, thorough and ruthless. She presented the missed visitations, the small apartment, the neighbor's testimony. She painted a picture of a father who was absent, overwhelmed, and unable to provide stability. "Your Honor," she said, her voice smooth as polished stone, "Mr. Turner may have good intentions, but intentions don't feed a child. Intentions don't provide a safe home. My client is asking for sole custody because she is the only parent capable of providing the stability Lily needs." Evelyn listened, her face carefully neutral, but her mind was somewhere else, somewhere in the rain, watching a man kneel in the mud to help a stranger. "Mr. Ortega," she said. "Your response?" The public defender stood, shuffling through his notes. He was young, overworked, and clearly outmatched. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges that his circumstances are difficult. He works nights to support his daughter. He's missed some visitations due to work conflicts, but he's never abandoned Lily. He loves her. He's doing everything he can." It was a weak defense, and everyone in the room knew it. Evelyn looked at Caleb. He was staring at the table, jaw tight, hands clenched. "Mr. Turner," she said quietly, "would you like to address the court?" He looked up, startled. For a moment he seemed frozen, as if he couldn't believe she was giving him the chance to speak. Then he stood. "Your Honor," he began, his voice rough, "I know I'm not perfect. I know my apartment's small, and I know I've missed some visits, but it's not because I don't care. It's because I'm trying to keep a roof over our heads." He paused, swallowed hard. "I work nights at the hospital, cleaning crew. It's not glamorous, but it's steady, and it pays enough to cover rent and food and the clothes Lily needs for school. But it also means I sleep during the day, and sometimes the visitation schedule doesn't line up. I've asked for adjustments, but—" His voice cracked. He stopped, took a breath. "I'm doing the best I can. And Lily knows I love her. She knows I'd do anything for her." The room was silent. Evelyn looked down at the file, at the photograph of the little girl with the stuffed rabbit, and she thought about the rain, about the stranger who'd stopped because someone needed help, about the man who'd said, "I was already here." She thought about the law, the rules, the procedures, the boundaries that kept the system fair, and she thought about justice, real justice, not the kind written in statutes, but the kind that recognized the difference between a bad parent and a struggling one. "Ms. Vickers," Evelyn said slowly, "you've presented evidence of difficult circumstances, but I'm not convinced that difficulty equals neglect." The attorney stiffened. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. The evidence is incomplete," Evelyn interrupted. "What I see here is a father working night shifts to provide for his child. That's not absence, that's sacrifice." She turned to the social worker. "Have there been any reports of abuse? Any evidence that Lily is in danger in her father's care?" The social worker hesitated. "No, Your Honor, just concerns about supervision and stability." "Concerns," Evelyn repeated, "not findings." She looked at Caleb again. He was staring at her, hope and disbelief warring on his face, and in that moment she made her choice. "I'm going to adjourn this hearing for 30 days, she said. "During that time, Mr. Turner will maintain his current visitation schedule. Additionally, I'm ordering the court to connect Mr. Turner with community resources, childcare assistance, scheduling mediation, and employment counseling. We're going to give him the support he needs to succeed, not punish him for struggling." Amanda Vickers stood. "Your Honor, with respect—" "My decision stands, Counselor," Evelyn said firmly. 30 days. We reconvene on December 15th. If Mr. Turner demonstrates progress, we'll discuss a permanent arrangement. She struck the gavel once. Court is adjourned. The room emptied slowly. Evelyn gathered her files, her hands trembling now that it was over. As she turned to leave, she saw Caleb still standing by the defense table. He was looking at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, they just stood there, separated by the length of the courtroom. Then he nodded once, small, almost imperceptible, and she nodded back. No words, no acknowledgement of what had passed between them on that rainy highway, just two people who understood that sometimes the right thing to do isn't written in any book. Evelyn walked back to her chambers, closed the door, and sat down heavily in her chair. She'd just made a decision that could end her career if anyone found out. But as she looked out the window at the gray November sky, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The drive home that evening felt longer than usual. Evelyn's hands gripped the steering wheel with the same intensity they had during the storm, but this time the roads were clear, the sky a pale wash of fading light. Her mind, however, was anything but calm. She'd crossed a line today. Not legally. Not yet. She'd been careful to frame her decision in terms that would hold up under scrutiny. Adjourning for resources, connecting a struggling parent with support services. These were reasonable judicial actions. But she knew the truth beneath the reasoning. She'd given Caleb Turner a chance because she'd seen who he was when no one was watching. That wasn't impartiality. That was something else entirely. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. She glanced down. A text from Margaret. Judge Hoffman wants to see you tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Evelyn's stomach clenched. Judge Raymond Hoffman was the senior judge in their district, a man with 30 years on the bench and a reputation for running a tight ship. He rarely called meetings unless something was wrong. She set the phone down and exhaled slowly. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was about the sentencing guidelines revision they'd been discussing. Maybe, but she knew better than to lie to herself. When she pulled into her parking space, the sky had turned the color of a bruise. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, unlocked the door, and stood for a moment in the threshold, looking at the carefully ordered space she'd built for herself. Everything in its place, everything controlled. Except now, something had shifted, and she couldn't put it back. She dropped her bag on the counter, poured herself a glass of wine she wouldn't drink, and sat in the dark by the window, watching the town square below. The fountain in the center was lit from beneath, water catching the light in fractured patterns. People moved through the square, couples, students, a man walking a dog, all of them unaware that their county judge was sitting above them, second-guessing every principle she'd built her career on. Her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, but the caller ID showed her sister's name. "Hey, Claire," she said, trying to sound normal. "You sound weird. What's wrong?" Evelyn closed her eyes. Claire had always been able to read her, even over the phone. "Long day. The judge thing or the human thing?" "Both." There was a pause. Claire was a social worker in Denver, someone who dealt with the messy reality of families every day. She understood the weight of decisions that affected lives. "You want to talk about it?" Claire asked. "I can't. Not really." "Okay, but you know what Dad used to say, right? The law is a skeleton. Justice is what gives it flesh." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Their father had been a defense attorney, a man who'd believed in the system but never worshipped it. He died 5 years ago, and she still heard his voice in quiet moments. "I remember," she said softly. "Whatever you're wrestling with, Ev, I trust your judgment. You're the best person I know." They talked for a few more minutes about nothing important, Claire's daughter's science project, their mother's upcoming birthday, and by the time they hung up, Evelyn felt steadier. Not certain, but steadier. She went to bed early but slept poorly, her dreams full of rain and courtrooms and a little girl holding a stuffed rabbit. The next morning, she arrived at the courthouse at 7:30 and went straight to Judge Hoffman's chambers. His secretary waved her in with a sympathetic smile that did nothing to ease Evelyn's nerves. Hoffman was sitting behind his massive oak desk, reading, glasses perched on his nose, reviewing a document. He was a barrel-chested man with silver hair and a face that had seen every kind of human failure. When he looked up, his expression was unreadable. "Evelyn, sit." She sat. He removed his glasses and set them on the desk. "I got a call yesterday afternoon from Amanda Vickers." Evelyn's heart dropped, but she kept her face neutral. "Regarding the Turner case. Regarding your decision to adjourn and order support services instead of ruling on the custody motion." He leaned back in his chair. "She's not happy. I'm aware. She thinks you're being soft, that you're prioritizing sentiment over the child's welfare." Evelyn met his gaze. "With respect, I disagree. The evidence didn't support a finding of neglect. What I saw was a parent struggling with poverty, not a parent failing their child. There's a difference." Hoffman was quiet for a moment, studying her. "You're not wrong. But Vickers also mentioned something else. She said you seemed personally invested." The room felt smaller. I treated the case with the same diligence I treat all my cases. I don't doubt that. He picked up a pen, tapped it against the desk. But I've been doing this a long time, Evelyn, and I've learned that the hardest part of this job isn't applying the law. It's maintaining the distance we need to apply it fairly. The moment we start seeing ourselves in the parties or seeing people we know, we compromise our objectivity. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Did he know? Had someone seen her talking to Caleb in the courtroom? I'm not accusing you of anything, Hoffman continued. I'm reminding you, because you're a good judge, one of the best I've seen in years, and I don't want you to undermine that by letting compassion cloud your judgment. She nodded slowly. I understand. Good. He put the pen down. Keep an eye on the Turner case. Make sure your next ruling is airtight. Vickers is going to be watching. I will. He dismissed her with a wave, and she walked back to her chambers feeling like she'd just survived an interrogation. Hoffman hadn't known about the highway, about the tire, about the rain, but he'd sensed something, and that was almost worse. She spent the rest of the morning buried in paperwork trying to distract herself, but at 11:30, Margaret knocked on her door. Judge Moore? There's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. Evelyn looked up, frowning. Who is it? Margaret hesitated. Caleb Turner. For a moment, Evelyn couldn't breathe. Tell him... She stopped, recalibrated. Tell him I can't meet with parties outside of court. He needs to go through his attorney. I told him that. He said he understands, but he wanted to drop something off for you. Evelyn closed her eyes. This was exactly what she didn't need. Fine, I'll be right out. She walked to the reception area, her mind already forming the words she'd use to send him away. But when she saw him standing there, hat in his hands, looking as out of place as a deer in a parking lot, the words died in her throat. He looked exhausted, more than he had in court. His eyes were shadowed, his shoulders hunched with the weight of too many sleepless nights. Mr. Turner, she said, keeping her voice formal, I can't speak with you about your case. You need to... I know, he said quickly. I'm not here about that. I wanted to give you this. He held out an envelope. Plain, white, slightly wrinkled. Evelyn stared at it. I can't accept gifts from... It's not a gift. It's just a thank you. For yesterday. His voice dropped. For giving me a chance. She looked at Margaret, who was pretending to be engrossed in her computer screen. Then she looked back at Caleb. This was a mistake. She should refuse. She should walk away. But she reached out and took the envelope. Mr. Turner, she said quietly, the court's decision was based on the evidence and the best interest of your daughter, nothing more. He nodded, but there was something in his eyes, gratitude, yes, but also understanding. He knew what she was really saying. Thank you, Your Honor, he said. Then he turned and walked out, the door closing softly behind him. Evelyn stood there for a long moment, the envelope heavy in her hand. Then she went back to her chambers, closed the door, and opened it. Inside was a single piece of notebook paper, the handwriting careful and uneven, like someone who didn't write often. Your Honor, I don't have the words to tell you what yesterday meant to me. For the first time in a long time, someone looked at me and saw more than just my circumstances. You saw me trying, and that's all I've ever wanted, for someone to see that I'm trying. I know you can't be involved in my life outside the courtroom. I understand that. But I needed you to know that what you did mattered, not just for me, but for Lily. She's everything to me, and you gave me a chance to prove that. I won't let you down. Caleb Turner. Evelyn read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in her desk drawer. Her hands were shaking. She'd told herself she could maintain the distance, that she could make fair decisions without letting the highway, the rain, the tire, without letting any of it affect her judgment. But sitting there, reading his words, she knew the truth. She was already involved, and there was no going back. The following week passed in a blur of hearings, motions, and the relentless machinery of the legal system. Evelyn threw herself into her work, meticulously reviewing every case, every ruling, every decision. She needed to be beyond reproach. If Amanda Vickers was watching, she couldn't afford a single misstep. But in the quiet moments, the drive home, The late nights when sleep wouldn't come, her thoughts returned to Caleb. She wondered if he'd connected with the resources she'd ordered, if he'd found childcare assistance, if he was managing to see Lily more often. She told herself it was professional concern, a judge following up on a case, but she knew better. On Thursday afternoon, she had a break between hearings and decided to walk to the small cafe across from the courthouse. It was a ritual she'd developed years ago, stepping out of the building, breathing air that didn't smell like floor wax and anxiety, reminding herself that there was a world beyond legal briefs. The cafe was crowded with the lunch rush, but she found a corner table and ordered a coffee. She was halfway through checking her email when a voice interrupted her. "Judge Moore?" She looked up. A woman in her 40s, neatly dressed in business casual, was standing beside her table with a warm smile. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the woman said. "I'm Lisa Chen. I'm a case manager with Family Support Services." Evelyn set down her phone. "Ms. Chen, please, sit." Lisa sat, pulling out a tablet. "I wanted to update you on Caleb Turner. I know the case is still pending, but I thought you'd want to know how he's doing with the resource connections." Evelyn's pulse quickened. This was information she should receive through official channels, but she couldn't bring herself to send Lisa away. "Go ahead." "He's been incredible," Lisa said, her voice genuinely impressed. "He came to our office the day after the hearing. We set him up with subsidized childcare through the county program, adjusted his visitation schedule to align with his work hours, and connected him with a financial counselor. He's already implemented every recommendation." "That's good to hear." "More than good. Most parents we work with take weeks to engage with services." Caleb had everything organized within days. He's also started picking up Lily from school twice a week. His supervisor at the hospital adjusted his shift to make it work. Lisa paused. "I've been doing this for 15 years, Judge Moore, and I can tell you, this is a man who loves his daughter. He's just been drowning without support." Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. "Thank you for the update, Ms. Chen." "Of course. I'll have a formal report ready before the next hearing." Lisa stood, then hesitated. "If I may say so, Your Honor, what you did in that courtroom made a real difference. Not just for Caleb, but for Lily. That little girl is going to have her father in her life because you saw past the paperwork." She left before Evelyn could respond. Evelyn sat there, coffee cooling in her hand, feeling the weight of those words. You saw past the paperwork. Wasn't that what justice was supposed to be? Seeing the human beings behind the case numbers? But it was also dangerous. Because the moment you started seeing people instead of cases, you risked losing the objectivity that made the system work. She finished her coffee and walked back to the courthouse, her mind turning over the same questions that had haunted her all week. That evening, she stayed late, working through a backlog of motions. The courthouse was nearly empty, the hallways echoing with her footsteps. She was locking her chambers when she heard voices from the main corridor, two people arguing in low, tense tones. She recognized Amanda Vickers' voice immediately. "Telling you, something's not right. She's too invested. I've seen the way she looks at him." Evelyn froze. A man's voice responded, unfamiliar. "You think she knows him?" "I don't know. But her decision to adjourn instead of rule? That's not standard procedure. And Judge Hoffman told me she's one of his best, so why is she suddenly going soft on a deadbeat dad?" "Maybe she actually believes what she said, that he's not neglectful, just struggling. Or maybe she's compromised." Vickers' voice was sharp. "I'm going to dig into this. If there's a connection, I'll find it." Evelyn's blood went cold. She stood in the dark hallway, barely breathing, as the voices faded toward the exit. When silence returned, she slumped against the wall, her heart hammering. Vickers was investigating her. If she found out about the highway, about the tire, about the fact that Evelyn had personal contact with Caleb before the hearing, it wouldn't matter that the contact was innocent. It wouldn't matter that Evelyn had made her decision based on evidence and the child's best interest. It would look like favoritism, like bias, like a judge who couldn't be trusted. She could lose her career, her reputation, everything she'd worked for. And Caleb could lose his daughter. Evelyn walked to her car in a daze, her mind racing through scenarios. She could recuse herself now, claim a conflict of interest, let another judge take over. It would raise questions, but it might be safer than waiting for Vickers to uncover the truth. But recusing now would also mean abandoning Caleb and Lily. The next judge might not see what she saw, might not give him the same chance. She sat in her car, staring at the dark courthouse, and made a decision. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to recuse. She was going to see this through, carefully, meticulously, making sure every decision was legally sound and fully documented. Because if she walked away now, she'd be admitting that compassion and justice couldn't coexist. And she refused to believe that. The following Monday, Evelyn received a formal request from Amanda Vickers, a motion to reconsider the adjournment and proceed immediately with a custody ruling. It was accompanied by a supplemental brief arguing that the delay was harmful to the child and that the father's recent compliance with services didn't erase his pattern of neglect. Evelyn read the motion carefully, making notes in the margins. Vickers was good. The arguments were solid, the case law well-researched, but they were also premature. 30 days hadn't even passed yet. She scheduled a hearing for the following week to address the motion. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Caleb's note, about Lisa Chen's update, about the little girl with the gap-toothed smile. She kept hearing Vickers' voice. If there's a connection, I'll find it. At 2 in the morning, she got out of bed and went to her desk. She pulled out the note Caleb had written and read it again. I won't let you down. She folded it, put it back in the drawer, and sat in the darkness, listening to the silence of her apartment. She'd spent 6 years on the bench building a reputation for fairness, for integrity, for following the law without fear or favor. She'd prided herself on being impartial, on never letting personal feelings influence her decisions. But now she understood something her father had tried to teach her years ago. The law wasn't just rules. It was a framework for protecting people. And sometimes, protecting people meant taking risks. She thought about the rain, about the stranger who'd stopped because someone needed help, about the man who'd said, I was already here. And she made her choice. She was going to fight for this. For Caleb. For Lily. For the principle that justice meant seeing people, not just cases, even if it cost her everything. The hearing on Vickers' motion was set for Thursday at 2. Evelyn arrived early, reviewed her notes one final time, and walked into the courtroom with her spine straight and her mind clear. Vickers was already there, impeccably dressed, flanked by Jenna Turner. Caleb sat with James Ortega, looking more composed than he had at the first hearing. He met Evelyn's eyes briefly, and she saw something there. Not hope, exactly, but determination. The bailiff called the court to order, and Evelyn opened the file. Ms. Vickers, she said, you filed a motion to reconsider the adjournment and proceed with a custody ruling. Please present your argument. Vickers stood, her voice smooth and confident. Your Honor, while we appreciate the court's intention to provide Mr. Turner with support services, the fact remains that a child's welfare cannot wait for a parent to get their act together. Lily Turner has been living in unstable conditions for months. The recent compliance with services is commendable, but it doesn't erase the pattern of neglect. My client is asking the court to act now, in the child's best interest, and grant her sole custody. She sat down, and Evelyn looked at James Ortega. Mr. Ortega? The public defender stood, his notes trembling slightly in his hand. Your Honor, Mr. Turner has done everything the court asked of him. He's engaged with services, adjusted his schedule, and demonstrated his commitment to his daughter. To rule now, before the 30-day period is complete, would be premature and unfair. It was a weak response, and Vickers knew it. She was already smiling, but Evelyn wasn't done. Mr. Turner, she said quietly, I'd like to hear from you. Caleb stood slowly, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Your Honor, he began, his voice stronger than before. I know I'm not perfect. I know my life isn't easy. But I'm doing everything I can to be the father Lily deserves. I've changed my work schedule. I've enrolled in the childcare program. I've met with the financial counselor. And I've been seeing Lily twice a week, picking her up from school, making her dinner, helping with her homework. He paused, his voice catching. She told me last week that she wants to live with me, not because her mom isn't good, but because she misses me, and I miss her every single day. Evelyn felt the weight of his words settle in the courtroom. She looked at Jenna Turner, who was staring at her hands, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at Vickers, who was watching her with sharp, calculating eyes, and she made her ruling. The motion to reconsider is denied, Evelyn said. The original order stands. We will reconvene in 2 weeks to review Mr. Turner's progress and make a final determination. Until then, the current visitation schedule remains in effect. She struck the gavel. Vickers stood immediately. Your Honor, I'd like to note my objection. Noted, Counselor. Court is adjourned. Evelyn gathered her files and left the courtroom, her heart pounding. She'd just painted a target on her back. Vickers would double down now, digging deeper, looking for any crack in Evelyn's armor. But as she walked back to her chambers, she felt something unexpected. Relief. Because she'd done the right thing. And no matter what came next, she could live with that. The relief lasted exactly 2 days. On Saturday morning, Evelyn woke to find her name trending on the local legal forum, a private message board used by attorneys and judges across the county. Someone had posted a thread titled Judicial Overreach or Compassionate Justice, and the comments were already multiplying like bacteria in a petri dish. She read through them with a growing sense of dread, her coffee going cold on the counter beside her laptop. Judge Moore's handling of Turner v. Turner sets a dangerous precedent. Since when do we adjourn custody cases to give deadbeat dads another chance? I've practiced in her court for 3 years. This isn't like her. Something's off. Maybe she's finally showing some humanity. Not every struggling parent is a bad parent. Humanity is fine. Bias is not. The last comment came from a username she recognized, Amanda Vickers' law partner. Evelyn closed the laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes. The forum was supposed to be confidential, restricted to verified legal professionals, but she knew how these things worked. Gossip had a way of leaking, and if the wrong person started asking the right questions, her entire career could unravel. She spent the rest of the weekend trying to distract herself, cleaning her apartment until it gleamed, going for long walks through the empty downtown streets, calling her sister and pretending everything was fine. But the anxiety sat in her stomach like a stone, heavy and cold. Monday morning brought no relief. She had barely settled into her chambers when Margaret knocked on the door, her expression tight with concern. Judge Moore? There's a reporter in the lobby from the county register. Evelyn's blood went cold. What do they want? They're asking about the Turner case, something about judicial discretion and public interest. Margaret lowered her voice. I told them you don't comment on pending cases, but they're insisting on a statement. Tell them I have no comment, and if they're still here in 5 minutes, call security. Margaret nodded and disappeared. Evelyn sat very still, her mind racing. The Register was a small paper, mostly covering local politics and high school sports, but they'd broken a corruption story 2 years ago that had ended a city councilman's career. If they smelled blood in the water, they wouldn't stop digging. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd been avoiding. Hoffman. Ray, it's Evelyn Moore. Do you have a minute? There was a pause. Come to my chambers, now. She walked down the hallway feeling like a defendant approaching the bench. When she entered Hoffman's office, he was standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the parking lot. Close the door, he said without turning around. She did. He turned to face her, and his expression was grave. I got a call this morning from the Register. They wanted my thoughts on whether you're showing favoritism in the Turner case. Evelyn's throat tightened. What did you tell them? I told them Judge Moore is one of the finest jurists I've worked with, and that I have complete confidence in her decisions. He paused. But I also told them that all judicial conduct is subject to review, and if there are concerns, they'll be addressed through proper channels. Ray. He held up a hand. I'm not accusing you of anything, but I need to ask you directly, Evelyn. Is there any conflict of interest in this case? Anything that would compromise your impartiality? The question hung in the air between them like smoke. She could tell him the truth about the highway, the rain, the tire. She could lay it all out and let him decide whether it constituted a conflict. It would be the honest thing to do, but it would also mean recusing herself. And that would mean abandoning Caleb and Lily to a system that might not see them the way she did. No, she said, meeting his eyes. There's no conflict of interest. I've made my decisions based on the evidence and the best interest of the child. Nothing more. Hoffman studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, but I want you to be extra careful going forward. Document everything. Make sure every ruling is airtight. Because if Vickers or anyone else files a formal complaint, you're going to need to defend every decision you've made. I understand. Good. Now go do your job. She left his office feeling like she'd just walked through a minefield. She hadn't lied. Not exactly. There was no legal conflict of interest. Helping someone change a tire didn't create a disqualifying relationship. But she'd omitted the truth, and that omission felt like a betrayal of everything she believed in. Back in her chambers, she pulled out the Turner file and began reviewing every document, every note, every decision. She drafted detailed memos explaining her reasoning for the adjournment, the resource connections, the denial of Vickers' motion. She cited case law, statutory guidelines, best practices in family court. She built a fortress of documentation around her decisions, making sure there were no gaps, no weaknesses that could be exploited. But even as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was building a house on sand. The next 2 weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness. Evelyn moved through her days with mechanical precision: hearings, motions, sentencing, plea bargains. She avoided the legal form, ignored the occasional whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by, and focused on the work. But at night, alone in her apartment, the doubts crept in. What if she was wrong? What if her judgment really was compromised? What if she was so determined to prove that compassion and justice could coexist that she'd lost sight of the line between them? She thought about calling Caleb, asking him how things were going, whether Lily was happy, but that would be crossing a line she couldn't uncross. So instead, she waited for Lisa Chen's reports, reading them like letters from a distant country. Caleb was thriving. He'd maintained perfect attendance with the childcare program, attended every scheduled visitation, and even enrolled in a parenting class offered through the community center. Lily was doing better in school, smiling more, talking about her dad with pride instead of sadness. The report should have reassured Evelyn. Instead, they made her more anxious. Because if Caleb failed now, if something went wrong in the final 2 weeks before the hearing, it would look like she'd been foolish to give him a chance, and Vickers would pounce. On the Wednesday before the final hearing, Evelyn stayed late at the courthouse preparing her notes. The building was quiet, the hallways empty except for the night security guard making his rounds. She was reviewing case law when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Judge Moore, this is Lisa Chen. I need to speak with you urgently. Can you call me? Evelyn's stomach dropped. She dialed immediately. Lisa answered on the first ring. Judge Moore, thank you for calling. I'm sorry to contact you directly, but something's happened with Caleb Turner, and I thought you should know before the hearing. Evelyn's grip tightened on the phone. What happened? He was involved in an incident at the hospital. There was an altercation with another employee, and security was called. The room seemed to tilt. Is he all right? Was anyone hurt? No one was hurt, but the hospital filed a report, and I wanted to give you a heads up before it reaches the court. Evelyn closed her eyes. Tell me what happened. Lisa's voice was careful, measured. From what I understand, another employee, a custodial supervisor, made some inappropriate comments about Caleb's situation. Something about him being in court, fighting for his kid. Caleb confronted him, and it escalated. Security intervened before it became physical, but there were witnesses. What kind of comments? I don't have the exact words, but the witnesses said the supervisor was mocking Caleb, saying things like, "Good luck keeping your kid," when the judge finds out what kind of father you really are. Lisa paused. Caleb apparently told him to mind his own business, and the supervisor pushed back. That's when it got heated. Evelyn felt her heart hammering. Did Caleb touch him? Did he threaten him? No. According to the report, Caleb kept his hands to himself. But he did raise his voice, and he used some strong language. The supervisor is claiming he felt threatened. Is the hospital pressing charges? No, they're handling it internally. But they did suspend Caleb for 3 days pending an investigation. Evelyn sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This was exactly the kind of thing Vickers would seize on. Evidence of poor judgment, inability to control his temper, instability. It didn't matter that Caleb was defending himself against harassment. It would be spun as proof that he wasn't ready to be a full-time parent. Thank you for telling me, Lisa. Of course. I just thought you should know. There was a pause. For what it's worth, Judge Moore, I don't think this changes anything. Caleb was provoked, and he's been nothing but professional in every other interaction I've witnessed. I appreciate that. After they hung up, Evelyn sat in the dark office, staring at the city lights beyond her window. She should feel vindicated. This was exactly why judges needed to maintain distance, why personal feelings couldn't influence decisions. Caleb had shown poor judgment, and now his case was compromised. But all she felt was a deep, aching sadness, because she knew what it was like to be pushed to the edge. She knew what it felt like when someone attacked the thing you loved most. And she couldn't blame him for defending his dignity. The question was, would the law see it that way? The final hearing was scheduled for Friday at 10. Evelyn arrived at the courthouse an hour early, her stomach churning with anxiety. She'd reviewed the hospital report a dozen times, crafted her questions carefully, prepared for every possible argument Vickers might make. But she couldn't prepare for the look on Caleb's face when he walked into the courtroom. He looked defeated. Not angry, not defiant, just tired. Bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep, and everything to do with a soul that had been beaten down too many times. James Ortega was beside him, looking equally grim. They took their seats at the defense table, and Caleb's hands were folded so tightly his knuckles were white. Across the aisle, Jenna Turner sat with Amanda Vickers, who was practically radiating confidence. She had a fresh stack of documents in front of her, and Evelyn knew without looking that they included the hospital incident report. The bailiff called the court to order, and Evelyn opened the file with hands that were steadier than she felt. We're here for the continued custody hearing in the matter of Turner versus Turner. This is the court's final review before making a permanent custody determination. She looked at both attorneys. Ms. Vickers, I understand you have additional evidence to present? Vickers stood, smooth as silk. Yes, Your Honor. We have a recent incident report from County General Hospital documenting an altercation involving Mr. Turner. We believe it demonstrates a pattern of poor judgment and inability to manage conflict, qualities that are directly relevant to this custody determination. She handed a copy to the bailiff, who brought it to Evelyn. It was the same report Lisa had described, but seeing it in official court documents made it feel more damning. Mr. Ortega, Evelyn said. The public defender stood. Your Honor, the incident in question was the result of workplace harassment. Mr. Turner was provoked by another employee who made derogatory comments about his personal situation. He did not initiate the confrontation, and he did not become physical. At most, this was a verbal disagreement that was blown out of proportion. He was suspended for 3 days, Vickers interjected. That's not nothing, Your Honor. Evelyn looked at Caleb. Mr. Turner, do you want to address this? He stood slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. Your Honor, I lost my temper. I shouldn't have. But when someone says things about your kid, about whether you deserve to be a father, his voice cracked. I'm not perfect. I've never claimed to be. But I've done everything you asked me to do. I've shown up. I've engaged with the services. I've been there for Lily. And one bad moment doesn't erase all of that. The courtroom was silent. Evelyn looked down at the file, at the hospital report, at the progress reports from Lisa Chen, at the photographs of a little girl who just wanted her father. And she thought about the rain, about a man who'd stopped to help a stranger without expecting anything in return, about the quiet dignity in his voice when he'd said, I was already here. She thought about justice, real justice, the kind that saw people instead of case numbers. And she made her decision. Ms. Vickers, I've reviewed the incident report. While Mr. Turner's conduct was not ideal, I don't find it rises to the level of disqualifying behavior. He was provoked, he did not become physical, and the hospital chose not to press charges. More importantly, this single incident must be weighed against 6 weeks of consistent progress, engagement with services, and documented improvement in his parenting. Vickers's face tightened. Your Honor, with respect, I'm not finished, Counselor. Evelyn's voice was firm. I've also reviewed the reports from Family Support Services. Mr. Turner has attended every parenting class, maintained perfect attendance with the child care program, and consistently engaged with Lily in meaningful ways. The social worker's assessment is that he poses no risk to the child and has demonstrated a strong commitment to her welfare. She paused, looking at both parents. This court's primary concern is the best interest of Lily Turner. And based on the totality of the evidence, I find that her best interest is served by maintaining a strong relationship with both parents. Jenna Turner's head came up sharply. I'm awarding joint legal and physical custody, Evelyn continued. Lily will split her time equally between both parents, with a schedule that accommodates Mr. Turner's work commitments. Both parents will participate in co-parenting counseling to ensure effective communication, and this arrangement will be reviewed in 6 months to assess how it's working for Lily. She looked directly at Caleb. Mr. Turner, you've been given a second chance. Don't waste it. Your daughter is counting on you. His eyes were shining. I won't, Your Honor. I promise. Evelyn struck the gavel. This court is adjourned. The room erupted in motion. Jenna Turner was crying softly, and Evelyn couldn't tell if it was from relief or disappointment. James Ortega was shaking Caleb's hand, grinning, and Amanda Vickers was gathering her papers with tight, angry movements. Evelyn stood to leave, but Vickers' voice stopped her. Your Honor, I'd like to request a moment in chambers. Evelyn's stomach clenched, but she nodded. 5 minutes. In her chambers, Vickers closed the door and turned to face her. The polished veneer was gone, replaced by barely contained fury. You just made a huge mistake, Vickers said quietly. I made a ruling based on the evidence. You made a ruling based on personal bias, and I'm going to prove it. Evelyn met her gaze steadily. If you believe my conduct warrants review, you're free to file a complaint with the Judicial Oversight Board, but I stand by my decision. Vickers smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Oh, I intend to. And when I'm done, everyone will know that Judge Evelyn Moore let her feelings compromise her judgment. You may have fooled Judge Hoffman, but you won't fool me. She left without waiting for a response. Evelyn sat down heavily in her chair, her hands trembling. It was done. The ruling was made, but the fight was just beginning. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of the hearing, every decision she'd made over the past 6 weeks. She'd crossed lines she never thought she'd cross. She'd risked her career for a man she barely knew and a child she'd never met. And she still didn't know if she'd done the right thing. At 3 a.m, she got up and went to her desk. She pulled out Caleb's note and read it one more time. I won't let you down. Then she opened her laptop and began drafting a document she hoped she'd never have to use. A detailed account of everything that had happened. From the highway to the courtroom, from the tire to the gavel. If Vickers filed a complaint, if the Oversight Board came calling, she wanted to be ready with the truth, not the sanitized version, not the legally defensible version, the whole truth. Because if she was going down honest. She worked until dawn, documenting every moment, every decision, every doubt. When she finished, she saved the file, encrypted it, and stored it in a secure folder. Then she made coffee, showered, dressed, and went to the courthouse. Because whatever came next, she still had a job to do. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety and second-guessing. Evelyn avoided the legal forum, ignored her phone, and spent most of Saturday walking through the state park on the edge of town. The trees were bare now, skeletal against the gray November sky, and the trails were muddy from recent rain. She thought about calling her sister, but she didn't want to burden Claire with problems she couldn't explain. She thought about calling Judge Hoffman, but she didn't want to hear the disappointment in his voice if Vickers had already filed her complaint. So she walked alone, trying to quiet the voice in her head that kept asking the same question over and over. Did you do the right thing? By Sunday evening, she still didn't have an answer. Monday morning brought a different kind of storm. She arrived at the courthouse to find Margaret waiting outside her chambers, her face pale. Judge Moore, there's something you need to see. Margaret handed her a printed email. It was from the Judicial Oversight Board, formally notifying her that a complaint had been filed regarding her conduct in Turner v. Turner. The complainant was Amanda Vickers. Evelyn read it twice, her heart sinking with each line. The complaint alleged bias, failure to recuse despite a conflict of interest, and conduct unbecoming a judicial officer. It requested a full investigation and recommended suspension pending the outcome. When did this come in? Evelyn asked, her voice surprisingly steady. This morning. I printed it as soon as I saw it. Evelyn nodded slowly. Thank you, Margaret. Please clear my calendar for the rest of the day. I need to prepare a response. Of course. Is there anything else I can do? No, just keep this quiet for now. Margaret hesitated. Judge Moore, if you need a character reference or if there's anything I can say to help, I appreciate that. But let's see what happens first. Alone in her chambers, Evelyn read the complaint again, this time with a lawyer's eye. Vickers had been thorough. She'd documented every decision Evelyn had made in the case, highlighted every moment of perceived leniency, and built a narrative of a judge who'd let personal feelings override professional judgment. But there was no mention of the highway, no evidence of prior contact between Evelyn and Caleb, which meant Vickers was fishing, making accusations based on suspicion rather than proof. The question was, would the oversight board dig deep enough to find the truth? Evelyn spent the rest of the day drafting her response. She laid out her reasoning for every decision, cited the legal precedents that supported her rulings, and documented the progress reports that justified her faith in Caleb. She explained the principle of rehabilitative justice, the importance of supporting struggling parents rather than punishing them, and the evidence that Lily's best interest was served by maintaining a relationship with her father. It was a strong response, legally sound, professionally crafted, but it was also incomplete, because she didn't mention the tire, the rain, the highway, the moment when she'd first seen the man behind the case file, and that omission felt like a lie. She submitted the response that evening and went home to wait. The next 2 weeks were agony. Every morning she woke expecting news from the oversight board. Every afternoon she checked her email compulsively, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Her cases continued. She presided over hearings, issued rulings, maintained the appearance of normalcy, but inside she felt like she was holding her breath. Then, on a cold Thursday afternoon, she received a call from Judge Hoffman. "My office, now." When she arrived, he was standing by the window again, but this time his posture was different, heavier, older. He turned to face her, and his expression was unreadable. "The Oversight Board has completed their preliminary review," he said. "They're not recommending suspension." Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. That's good news." "It's not over," Hoffman continued. "They're conducting a full investigation. They want to interview you, review all your case files from the past year, and speak with attorneys who've appeared in your court. This is going to take months, Evelyn, and it's going to be scrutinized by everyone in the county." She nodded, trying to process what he was saying. "There's something else," Hoffman said quietly. "Vickers has been making noise about prior contact between you and Caleb Turner. She doesn't have proof, but she's asking questions, talking to people. If there's something you haven't told me, now is the time." The moment stretched between them like a tightrope. Evelyn could tell him the truth. Right now. Before the investigation went any further. She could explain about the highway, the tire, the rain. She could lay it all out and let the chips fall where they may. Or she could stay silent. Bet on the fact that Vickers would never find proof. Hope that the investigation would clear her based on the legal merits of her decisions. She looked at Hoffman, a man who'd mentored her, trusted her, defended her, a man who deserved honesty, and she made her choice. "There was an incident," she said quietly. "Before the first hearing, I had a flat tire on Route 47. Caleb Turner stopped and helped me change it. We didn't exchange names. I didn't know who he was. But when he walked into my courtroom the next day, I recognized him." The silence that followed was crushing. Hoffman's face went very still. "And you didn't recuse yourself?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I believed I could still be impartial. The contact was brief, impersonal. It didn't create a relationship, and I thought—" Her voice caught. "I thought I could make fair decisions despite it." "Despite it," Hoffman repeated. "Or because of it." The question hung in the air like an accusation. Evelyn met his eyes. "I don't know anymore." Hoffman sat down heavily in his chair. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at his desk like it held answers he couldn't find. Finally, he looked up. "You should have told me. From the beginning." "I know. This changes everything. If Vickers finds out, when she finds out, it won't matter how sound your legal reasoning was. It won't matter that Turner was making progress. All anyone will see is a judge who had personal contact with a party and didn't disclose it." "I understand." "Do you?" His voice was sharp now. "Because I'm not sure you do." This isn't just about your career, Evelyn. It's about the integrity of this entire court. Every decision you've made in the past 6 years will be questioned. Every ruling will be suspect. You've jeopardized everything we've built here." The words hit like physical blows. Because he was right. She'd been so focused on doing what she thought was right for Caleb and Lily that she hadn't considered the broader consequences. "What do I do now?" she asked quietly. Hoffman was silent for a long time. Then he sighed, and suddenly he looked every one of his 65 years. "You tell the oversight board the truth. All of it. You hope they see it the way you do, as a minor incident that didn't affect your judgment, and you prepare for the possibility that they won't." He stood, walked to the door, and opened it. "You're a good judge, Evelyn. One of the best I've seen. But good intentions don't excuse procedural failures, and I'm not sure I can protect you from this." She left his office feeling like she'd just been handed a death sentence. That night, she sat at her desk and stared at the encrypted files she'd created weeks ago. The whole truth, documented and waiting. Tomorrow, she would send it to the oversight board. She would confess everything and face whatever consequences came. But tonight, she allowed herself one moment of doubt, one question that wouldn't stop echoing in her mind. If she could go back to that rainy highway, knowing everything that would follow, would she still stop? Would she still accept Caleb's help? Would she still make the same choices? She didn't know, and that uncertainty terrified her more than any investigation ever could. The morning she was scheduled to meet with the oversight board, Evelyn woke at 4:30 with her heart already racing. She'd barely slept, her mind cycling through every possible outcome, every question they might ask, every way this could go wrong. The encrypted file sat on her laptop like a confession waiting to be heard, and she'd read it so many times the words had lost all meaning. She showered in near darkness, dressed in her most conservative suit, navy blue, nothing flashy, the uniform of someone who had nothing to hide, and made coffee she couldn't drink. Her hands shook as she poured it, and she set the mug down before she could spill it across the counter. At 6, she sat at her kitchen table and opened the file one last time. The truth, laid out in clinical detail. The storm. The tire. The stranger who became a father fighting for his daughter. Every decision she'd made afterward, documented and justified and completely, utterly damning. She closed the laptop and stared at her reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back seemed like a stranger, pale, drawn, eyes shadowed with sleepless nights and moral compromise. 6 years of building a reputation, and it had all come down to one rainy evening on a deserted highway. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister Claire. "Thinking of you today. You've got this. Call me when it's over." Evelyn typed a reply, deleted it, tried again. Finally settled on, "Thanks, I'll call soon." She gathered her things, laptop, file folders, the printed statement she'd revised a dozen times, and drove to the state administrative building where the oversight board held their meetings. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale gold, and the streets were empty except for a few early commuters and delivery trucks. The administrative building was a concrete monolith on the edge of downtown, the kind of government structure designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Evelyn had been here once before, years ago, to witness a colleague's disciplinary hearing. She remembered the cold fluorescent lighting, the long hallways that echoed with every footstep, the sense that justice here was more bureaucratic than human. She checked in with security, rode the elevator to the 4th floor, and found herself in a waiting area outside conference room 4B. The chairs were uncomfortable, the magazines outdated, and the clock on the wall ticked with aggressive precision. At 8:55, the door opened, and a woman in her 60s emerged, gray-haired and businesslike, in a way that suggested she'd seen every kind of judicial misconduct imaginable and been surprised by none of it. "Judge Moore, I'm Ellen Pritchard, chair of the Oversight Board. We're ready for you." Evelyn stood, her legs steadier than she expected, and followed Ellen into the conference room. 5 people sat around a long table, 3 men, 2 women, all with the exhausted expressions of people who spent their days reviewing complaints and determining fates. Name placards identified them. Ellen Pritchard, chair. Robert Chen, vice chair. Marcus Johnson. Patricia Valdez. David Reese. Ellen gestured to a chair at the head of the table. "Please sit. Can we get you water? Coffee? Water would be fine, thank you. Someone poured her a glass from a pitcher, and she took it with hands that barely trembled. A small victory. Ellen opened a file folder thick with documents. Judge Moore, thank you for coming in today. As you know, we're conducting an investigation into a complaint filed by attorney Amanda Vickers regarding your handling of Turner versus Turner. We've reviewed your written response, and we have some questions. Of course. Robert Chen leaned forward, his fingers steepled. Let's start with the basics. When did you first become aware of Caleb Turner? This was it. The moment where she either told the truth or committed perjury in front of the very people charged with upholding judicial integrity. Evelyn took a breath. I first encountered Caleb Turner approximately 6 weeks before the initial custody hearing. It was late evening during a rainstorm. I had a flat tire on Route 47, and Mr. Turner stopped to help me change it. The silence that followed was profound. Ellen's pen stopped mid-note. Patricia Valdez's eyebrows rose. Marcus Johnson exchanged a glance with David Reese. You had personal contact with a party before presiding over his case, Ellen said slowly. And you didn't recuse yourself. That's correct. Why not? Evelyn chose her words carefully. At the time, we didn't exchange names or personal information. The interaction lasted perhaps 15 minutes. He helped me change the tire, refused payment, and we parted ways. I had no reason to believe I would ever see him again, and I certainly didn't know he would appear in my courtroom the following day. But when he did appear, Robert Chen said, you recognized him. Yes, and at that point you should have recused yourself. Perhaps, but I believed I could still be impartial. The contact was minimal, impersonal, and didn't create any relationship or obligation. I thought... She paused, then decided to be completely honest. I thought that recusing myself would delay the case unnecessarily, and I believed I could make fair decisions despite the prior contact. Patricia Valdez spoke up, her voice measured. Judge Moore, help us understand your reasoning. You've been on the bench for 6 years. You know the rules regarding conflicts of interest. What made you think this situation didn't warrant recusal? Evelyn met her gaze. Because I didn't believe 15 minutes of impersonal interaction created a conflict. If I recused myself every time I had brief contact with someone who later appeared in my court, at a grocery store, a gas station, a restaurant, I'd never be able to hear any cases. The contact was incidental. It didn't influence my judgment. Didn't it? Marcus Johnson's voice was sharp. You gave Mr. Turner multiple opportunities that you might not have given another litigant. You adjourned the case for services instead of ruling. You denied the motion to reconsider. You ultimately awarded joint custody despite evidence of instability. How do we know that wasn't influenced by your prior contact? Because I documented every decision, Evelyn said firmly. I cited legal precedents. I relied on expert testimony from social workers. I based my rulings on the evidence presented in court, not on personal feelings. But you did have personal feelings, Ellen said quietly. Didn't you? The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. Evelyn could deny it. She could claim perfect objectivity, insist that her decisions were purely legal, but these people had decades of experience reading judges, reading people. They would know a lie when they heard one. Yes, she said finally, I had personal feelings. I was grateful that Mr. Turner had helped me. I respected the quiet dignity he showed in a situation where many people would have driven past. And when I saw him in my courtroom, struggling to keep his daughter, I saw a human being who deserved a fair chance. She leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. But those feelings didn't compromise my judgment. They informed it. They reminded me that behind every case file is a real person with real struggles. That's not bias. That's humanity. And if we lose that, if we reduce justice to pure procedure without any consideration of the people we're supposed to serve, then we've failed at our most fundamental duty. The room was silent. Ellen made a note. Robert Chen rubbed his temples. Patricia Valdez was watching Evelyn with an expression that was hard to read, not hostile, but not sympathetic either. David Reese, who hadn't spoken yet, cleared his throat. Judge Moore, let me ask you this. If the oversight board determines that your conduct in this case violated ethical guidelines, what would you say to that? Evelyn considered the question carefully. I would accept the consequences of my actions. I made a choice to prioritize what I believed was right over what was procedurally safe. If that choice is deemed unacceptable, I'll face whatever penalties are appropriate. Even if it means losing your position? The words hung in the air like a threat. Evelyn thought about the courtroom, the gavel in her hand, the weight of decisions that affected lives. She thought about the work she'd done over 6 years, the careful rulings, the balanced judgments, the belief that law could be both just and merciful. And she thought about Caleb and Lily, about a little girl who would grow up with her father because someone had been willing to see past the paperwork. Yes, she said quietly, even if it means that. Ellen closed her file folder. Thank you, Judge Moore. We'll deliberate and provide our findings within 30 days. You'll receive written notification of our decision. Evelyn stood, shook hands with each board member, and walked out of the conference room with her spine straight and her head high. But as soon as the elevator doors closed, she leaned against the wall and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in her chest for weeks. It was done. The truth was out. And now all she could do was wait. She drove to the courthouse in a daze, parked in her usual spot, and sat in the car for 10 minutes before she could bring herself to go inside. When she finally entered the building, Margaret took one look at her face and said, "How bad?" "I told them everything." Margaret's expression softened. "Good. That was the right thing to do." "Was it? Because right now it feels like I just ended my career." "Maybe. But at least you'll be able to live with yourself." Margaret handed her a stack of messages. "You have a sentencing at 2 and a motion hearing at 3:30. Try to focus on the work." Evelyn took the messages and retreated to her chambers. For the next several hours, she buried herself in case files, preparing for the afternoon's hearings with a focus that bordered on obsessive. Work was the only thing keeping her from spiraling into panic. At 1:30, she was reviewing sentencing guidelines when there was a knock on her door. She looked up to find James Ortega, the public defender from the Turner case, standing in her doorway. "Judge Moore, do you have a minute?" She gestured to a chair. "What can I do for you, Mr. Ortega?" He sat down, looking uncomfortable. "I heard about the investigation, the complaint. I wanted you to know that if the Oversight Board needs a statement from me about your conduct in the Turner case, I'll tell them you were fair. More than fair. You gave my client a chance when a lot of judges would have just ruled against him." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "I appreciate that, but I'm not sure it will help. The issue isn't whether I was fair. It's whether I should have recused myself." "Maybe. But for what it's worth, I've practiced in front of a lot of judges. Some of them care more about clearing their dockets than about the people in front of them. You're not one of those judges. You actually give a damn. And that matters." After he left, Evelyn sat for a long moment, staring at the closed door. She'd spent the past few weeks questioning everything, her judgment, her decisions, her fitness to wear the robe. But hearing Ortega's words reminded her why she'd become a judge in the first place. Not to follow rules for the sake of rules, but to help people find justice in a system that too often treated them like numbers. The afternoon hearings passed in a blur. She sentenced a repeat DUI offender to treatment and probation, denied a motion to suppress evidence in a drug case, and approved a plea agreement in an assault case. The work was familiar, mechanical, and by the time 5 o'clock came, she felt wrung out. She was packing up her files when her phone rang. An unfamiliar number, local area code. "Judge Moore." "Your Honor, this is Caleb Turner. I hope it's okay that I'm calling." Her heart lurched. "Mr. Turner, you really shouldn't be contacting me directly. The case is closed, but I know. I'm sorry. I heard about the investigation, about the complaint, and I needed to tell you that this is my fault." Evelyn sat down heavily. "It's not your fault. I made my own choices. Choices you wouldn't have had to make if I hadn't stopped that night on the highway. If I'd just driven past you, then I would have been stranded in the rain, and you would have missed the chance to help someone who needed it. Don't second-guess an act of kindness, Mr. Turner." There was a long silence. When Caleb spoke again, his voice was thick. "I got Lily back, joint custody, like you ruled. We're figuring it out, me and Jenna. It's not perfect, but Lily's happy. She's thriving, and that's because of you." "It's because of you," Evelyn corrected gently. "You did the work. You engaged with the services, showed up for your daughter, proved you could be the father she needed. I just gave you the opportunity." "You gave me more than that. You gave me hope." He paused. "If there's anything I can do, a statement for the board, testimony, anything, I'll do it. I owe you that much." "You don't owe me anything, but if they contact you, just tell the truth. That's all anyone can ask." After they hung up, Evelyn sat in the gathering darkness of her office, thinking about hope, about how fragile it was, how easily crushed, and about how sometimes giving someone hope was worth any risk. The next 3 weeks were excruciating. Evelyn went through the motions of her job, presiding over hearings and writing opinions, but her mind was always elsewhere, wondering what the oversight board was deciding. She avoided the legal forum, ignored the gossip that swirled through the courthouse hallways, and focused on maintaining her composure. At night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake imagining the letter that would arrive, the formal notification that she'd violated ethical guidelines, that her conduct was unacceptable, that she was being removed from the bench. She imagined packing up her chambers, saying goodbye to Margaret, walking out of the courthouse for the last time. And she wondered if it would be worth it, if saving one father-daughter relationship justified destroying her career. She still didn't have an answer. On a Friday afternoon, 3.5 weeks after the hearing, Margaret knocked on her door with an expression Evelyn couldn't read. "There's a letter from the oversight board." Evelyn's hands went numb. "Bring it in." Margaret handed her the envelope and quietly closed the door. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment. Official seal, formal weight. The kind of envelope that contained decisions that changed lives. She opened it with hands that barely shook and read the letter once, twice, 3 times before the words started to make sense. After careful review of the complaint filed by attorney Amanda Vickers and thorough investigation of the allegations, the Judicial Oversight Board has determined that Judge Evelyn Moore's conduct in Turner v. Turner, while not ideal, did not rise to the level of ethical violation warranting disciplinary action. The board acknowledges that Judge Moore had brief, incidental contact with a party prior to the case proceeding. However, we find that this contact was minimal, impersonal, and did not create a relationship or obligation that would require recusal. While Judge Moore should have disclosed the contact to the parties and offered the opportunity for recusal, we do not find evidence that the contact influenced her judicial decisions. The board has reviewed all rulings in the Turner case and finds them to be legally sound, well-reasoned, and supported by the evidence presented. Judge Moore's decisions reflect appropriate judicial discretion and consideration of the child's best interest. However, the board issues the following directive. Judge Moore is reminded of the importance of disclosure in matters involving prior contact with parties, even when such contact appears minimal. Going forward, any potential conflicts of interest, no matter how minor, should be disclosed to ensure transparency and maintain public confidence in the judiciary. This matter is closed. No further action is warranted. Evelyn read it a 4th time, and then a 5th, waiting for her brain to catch up with the words on the page. No disciplinary action. The matter was closed. She'd survived. The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. She set the letter down and pressed her hands to her face, feeling tears she hadn't expected burning behind her eyes. For weeks, she'd been bracing for the worst, preparing herself for the end of everything she'd worked for. And instead, she'd been given a second chance, just like the one she'd given Caleb. There was a soft knock, and Margaret peeked in. "Judge Moore?" Evelyn looked up, wiping her eyes quickly. "It's over. They're not taking action." Margaret's face broke into a wide smile. "I knew it. I knew they'd see you did the right thing." "They said I should have disclosed the contact. They're right." "Maybe. But you made a judgment call, and it turned out okay. That's what judges do, right? Make tough calls?" Evelyn managed a weak laugh. "I suppose so." After Margaret left, Evelyn sat alone in her chambers, holding the letter and thinking about everything that had happened over the past 2 months. The storm, the tire, the courtroom, the investigation. All of it leading to this moment, this reprieve. She thought about calling her sister, telling Claire the good news. She thought about telling Judge Hoffman, seeing the relief in his face. But first, there was something else she needed to do. She pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. Mr. Turner, I wanted you to know that the investigation has been concluded and no disciplinary action is being taken. The Oversight Board found that while I should have disclosed our prior contact, my rulings in your case were legally sound and in Lily's best interest. I'm telling you this not because I want thanks, but because I want you to understand something important. The outcome of this case was never about me. It was about you and your commitment to your daughter. You did the work. You showed up. You proved that you deserved a chance. I hope you and Lily continue to thrive, and I hope you never stop being the kind of person who stops to help a stranger in the rain. She signed it, sealed it in an envelope, and set it aside. She would mail it tomorrow, one final chapter in a story that had tested every principle she held dear. That evening, as she drove home through streets lit by street lamps in early December darkness, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. Not because everything had turned out perfectly, it hadn't. Not because she'd made all the right choices, she hadn't. But because she'd faced the consequences of her decisions with honesty, and somehow the system had found room for mercy. She thought about her father's words, the ones Claire had reminded her of weeks ago. The law is a skeleton. Justice is what gives it flesh. For the first time in a long time, she understood what he'd meant. The law provided structure, boundaries, rules that kept society functioning. But justice required something more. It required seeing the humanity in those boundaries, understanding that rules existed to serve people, not the other way around. She'd bent the rules, yes, but in doing so, she'd served justice in a way that purely procedural correctness never could have. And that, she realized, was what separated a good judge from a great one. Not the ability to follow rules without question, but the wisdom to know when those rules needed to be tempered with compassion. As she pulled into her parking space and looked up at her apartment building, she felt the weight of the past 2 months finally lifting. Tomorrow, she would go back to court. She would preside over hearings, make rulings, serve justice as best she could. But she would do it differently now, with more awareness of the power she held, with more humility about her own limitations, and with more courage to trust her judgment when the right thing to do wasn't written in any rulebook. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, unlocked the door, and stood for a moment in the threshold, looking at the space she'd called home for years. Everything in its place, everything controlled. But now she understood that control was an illusion. Life was messy, unpredictable, full of moments when the right choice wasn't clear, and the only guide was conscience. And sometimes that had to be enough. She closed the door, poured herself a glass of wine, and this time she actually drank it, and sat by the window watching the lights of the town square below. The fountain was lit, water catching the light in fractured patterns. People moved through the square, living their lives, carrying their own storms and struggles. And somewhere in that town, a little girl was spending the evening with her father, both of them building a life that might not have been possible without one rainy night and one risky decision. Evelyn raised her glass in a silent toast to the stranger who'd stopped to help, to the father who'd fought for his daughter, and to the possibility that sometimes, just sometimes, taking a chance on someone was worth every risk. The next morning, she mailed the letter to Caleb and went to work with a lightness she hadn't felt in months. The courthouse was the same gray walls, same smell of floor wax, same steady rhythm of justice being served. But she saw it differently now. She saw it as a place where rules and humanity could coexist, where mercy and justice weren't opposites but partners, where people like her could make imperfect decisions and still, somehow, make things right. And as she settled into her chambers, reviewing the day's docket, she felt ready for whatever came next. Because she'd learned something valuable through all of this. The hardest decisions weren't about choosing between right and wrong. They were about choosing between two rights, between the letter of the law and the spirit of it, between procedure and compassion, between protecting yourself and protecting others. And sometimes, the bravest thing you could do was choose compassion even when it cost you everything. Even when you weren't sure it would work out. Even when the only thing guiding you was the memory of a stranger in the rain doing what needed to be done because someone needed help. She pulled out the first file of the day and got to work, ready to serve justice the only way she knew how, with integrity, with courage, and with the understanding that sometimes The law was just the beginning. Justice was what came after. 3 months passed like pages turning in a book Evelyn had already read, but was seeing with new eyes. Winter settled over the county in earnest, snow dusting the courthouse steps, frost etching patterns on her chamber windows, the short days bleeding into long nights that smelled of wood smoke and possibility. The letter she'd sent to Caleb went unanswered, which was exactly as it should be. Their story had reached its natural conclusion in that courtroom, with a gavel strike and a child's future secured. Whatever gratitude he felt didn't need to be spoken. She'd done her job. He was doing his. And somewhere between those two truths, a little girl was learning that the world could be fair, even when it didn't seem that way. Evelyn's days returned to their familiar rhythm. Hearings and motions, sentencing and deliberations, the steady machinery of justice grinding forward. But something had shifted in how she approached the work. She listened more carefully now to the stories behind the paperwork. She asked more questions of social workers and probation officers. She looked at the faces of the people standing before her bench and saw not just cases to be resolved, but lives to be understood. Judge Hoffman noticed the change. He stopped by her chambers one afternoon in mid-January, ostensibly to discuss the new sentencing guidelines, but really, she suspected, to see how she was holding up after the investigation. "You seem different," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Steadier, somehow." Evelyn looked up from the brief she was reviewing. "I went through fire. Either you come out stronger or you don't come out at all. And you came out stronger." "I came out changed," she corrected. "Whether that's stronger remains to be seen." Hoffman was quiet for a moment, studying her with those sharp eyes that had seen 30 years of judges come and go. "You know, when I first heard about the investigation, I was furious. Not at you, at myself. I should have seen the conflict. I should have asked the right questions. You couldn't have known. Maybe not. But I've been thinking about what you said in there, to the oversight board, about humanity being part of justice, not separate from it." He leaned forward. "I spent the first 20 years of my career believing that distance was essential, that getting too close to the people in our courtroom would compromise our judgment. And maybe that's true sometimes. But maybe we've swung too far the other way. Maybe we've forgotten that we're supposed to serve people, not just process them." Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. "Are you saying I did the right thing?" "I'm saying you did a brave thing, and sometimes those are the same." He stood, straightened his tie. "Keep doing what you're doing, Evelyn. The system needs judges who remember why we're here." After he left, she sat for a long time, watching the snow fall past her window. She thought about all the choices that had led her to this moment: the rainy highway, the stranger's kindness, the decision to stay on the case despite knowing she should recuse herself. Every choice had carried risk. Every choice had required faith in something that couldn't be measured or proven. And somehow, it had all worked out. Not perfectly, not without cost, but well enough that she could sleep at night knowing she'd tried to do right by a child who needed her father. February brought a cold snap that froze the fountain in the town square and turned the courthouse into a drafty maze of overworked radiators and chattering teeth. Evelyn wore sweaters under her robe and kept a space heater running in her chambers, much to Margaret's amusement. "You're from here," Margaret said one morning, delivering coffee and a stack of motions. "You should be used to the cold by now." "Being used to something doesn't mean I have to like it." Margaret laughed and was about to leave when she paused at the door. "Oh, I almost forgot. There's a community legal aid event next week, providing free consultations for families dealing with custody issues. They asked if any judges would be willing to speak about the process, help people understand what to expect. I told them you might be interested." Evelyn's first instinct was to decline. She'd spent the past few months trying to keep her head down, avoid attention, let the memory of the investigation fade. But then she thought about Caleb, standing in her courtroom with hope and terror warring on his face, not understanding the system that held his daughter's future in its hands. "Tell them yes," she said. "I'll do it." The event was held on a Saturday morning at the community center, a squat brick building that smelled of coffee and old carpet. Evelyn arrived early, dressed casually in slacks and a sweater, trying not to look too much like a judge. The organizers had set up tables around the perimeter where volunteer lawyers offered consultations, and in the center of the room, a small stage with a microphone. The families started arriving around 9. Parents who looked tired and worried, children who clung to their hands or ran around the room with the oblivious energy of kids too young to understand why mommy and daddy didn't live together anymore. Evelyn watched them, feeling the weight of how many lives were shaped by the decision she made in her courtroom. At 10, she took the stage and looked out at the 50 or so people gathered in folding chairs, waiting to hear what she had to say. "Good morning," she began, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "My name is Evelyn Moore, and I'm a county judge. I know a lot of you are here because you're going through custody disputes, and I want to start by saying this. I see you. The court sees you. And we understand that behind every case file is a real family, real pain, real love." She paused, choosing her words carefully. The legal system can feel cold and impersonal. You stand in front of a judge in a black robe, and it's easy to forget that underneath that robe is just a person trying to make the best decision they can with the information they have. But that's what we are. People. Imperfect people doing our best to serve justice. Someone in the back shifted in their seat. A woman in the front row was crying quietly. Evelyn continued, her voice growing stronger. "If you're fighting for your children, know this. The court's only concern is what's best for them. Not what's fair to you, not what's convenient, but what serves their well-being. And sometimes that means making hard choices. Sometimes it means looking past what's easy and seeing what's right." She talked for 20 minutes, explaining the custody process, answering questions, trying to demystify a system that too often felt like a maze designed to confuse. And when she was done, a line formed. Parents wanting to thank her, to share their stories, to feel seen by someone who held power over their lives. Among them was a young woman, maybe 30, with a baby on her hip and exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "Judge Moore," she said hesitantly, "I just wanted to say thank you. My ex took me to court 6 months ago, trying to get full custody because I was working 2 jobs and couldn't always pick up our son on time. The judge, not you, someone else, she saw that I was trying. She gave me a chance to get help, to find better childcare, to prove I could do it. And now my son is with me half the time, and we're making it work." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "I'm glad you got that chance." "I heard about what you did," the woman said quietly. "For that father, the one everyone was talking about. How you gave him a chance too, even when people said you shouldn't. I just wanted you to know, people like us, we don't forget that. We don't forget when someone sees us as human instead of just a case number." After she walked away, Evelyn stood for a moment, blinking back tears. Because that was the whole point, wasn't it? To see people. To remember that justice wasn't about following rules blindly, but about using those rules to protect and serve humanity. March arrived with the first hints of spring, crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow, days growing longer, the air carrying the promise of warmth to come. Evelyn was in her chambers one afternoon when Margaret knocked with an unusual expression on her face. "There's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." "Who is it?" "Lisa Chen, the case manager from Family Support Services." Evelyn felt a flutter of concern. "Send her in." Lisa entered with a warm smile, carrying a folder. "Judge Moore, I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to update you on the Turner family." Evelyn gestured to a chair. "Is everything all right?" "More than all right. I wanted you to see this before I file my final report." Lisa opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. "This was taken last week." The photo showed Caleb and Lily at a playground, both of them on a swing set. Lily was mid-air, her face split in a wide grin, her hair flying. Caleb was beside her, looking at his daughter with an expression of pure joy. Evelyn felt something warm and bright bloom in her chest. "They're thriving," Lisa said. Caleb's been promoted to a day shift supervisor position at the hospital. It came with a raise and better hours, which means he can be more present for Lily. He and Jenna have worked out a co-parenting arrangement that actually functions. And Lily, Lisa's smile widened. "That little girl is happy. Her teachers say she's more engaged, more confident. She talks about both her parents with love." "That's wonderful," Evelyn said softly. It is. And it's because you saw what was possible instead of just what was on paper. Lisa closed the folder. I've been doing this work for 15 years, Judge Moore. I've seen a lot of judges. Most of them are good people trying to do a hard job, but very few of them are willing to take the kind of risk you took, to trust that someone struggling isn't the same as someone failing. After Lisa left, Evelyn sat holding the photograph, looking at the joy on Lily's face. This was why she'd become a judge. Not for the salary or the title or the respect of her peers, but for moments like this, moments where the decision she made in a courtroom rippled outward into a life, into a family, into a future that might not have existed otherwise. She put the photo in her desk drawer next to Caleb's note from months ago. Small reminders that justice, when done right, was more than law. It was hope. The 6-month review hearing for the Turner case was scheduled for late April. Evelyn wasn't required to preside. The case could have been reassigned to another judge for the review, but she wanted to see it through, wanted to close the circle she'd opened that rainy night on the highway. The courtroom was quieter this time. No reporters, no tension crackling through the air. Just Caleb and Jenna, their attorneys, Lisa Chen with her final report, and the ordinary machinery of justice turning one last time. Amanda Vickers was noticeably absent. Her partner, a younger attorney named Marcus Webb, appeared on Jenna's behalf, and his demeanor was notably different from Vickers' aggressive approach. "Your Honor," he said when it was his turn to speak, "my client is satisfied with the current custody arrangement. She and Mr. Turner have developed an effective co-parenting relationship, and Lily is benefiting from strong relationships with both parents. We have no objections to making the joint custody arrangement permanent." Evelyn looked at Jenna, who nodded. There was no anger in her face now, no resentment, just tired acceptance, and maybe, beneath it, relief. Then she looked at Caleb. He was wearing a new shirt, his hair neatly trimmed, his posture more confident than it had been 6 months ago. When their eyes met, he nodded once, a gesture of respect, of gratitude, of acknowledgement that they'd both survived something difficult and come out better for it. "Mr. Turner," Evelyn said, "I've reviewed the reports from Family Support Services. You've exceeded every expectation set before you. You've maintained stable employment, engaged consistently with your daughter, and demonstrated a clear commitment to co-parenting. The court commends you for the progress you've made." She looked at both parents. "Joint legal and physical custody is hereby made permanent, with the current visitation schedule to remain in effect. The court will retain jurisdiction for 1 year to address any issues that arise, but I have every confidence that you both will continue to prioritize Lily's well-being." She struck the gavel. "This matter is concluded." As the courtroom emptied, Caleb approached the bench. James Ortega was beside him but hung back, giving them a moment. "Your Honor," Caleb said quietly, "I wanted to thank you for everything." Evelyn shook her head. "You thanked me months ago. You don't need to do it again." "I know, but I needed to say it one more time, here, at the end. What you did, the chance you gave me, it changed my life. It changed Lily's life, and I promise you, I won't waste it." "I know you won't," Evelyn said. "You've already proven that." He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes. "I got a letter from you, after the investigation. You said you hoped I'd keep being the kind of person who stops to help strangers in the rain. I meant it. I will. Because someone did that for me once, and it made all the difference." He paused. "Actually, someone did it twice. Once on a highway, and once in a courtroom." Before Evelyn could respond, he nodded respectfully and walked away, James Ortega clapping him on the shoulder as they left. Evelyn sat at the bench for a long moment after they'd gone, feeling the weight and lightness of conclusion. The case was over. The investigation was closed. The story had reached its end. But the ripples would continue. In a little girl's laughter, in a father's second chance, in the reminder that justice could be both firm and merciful. That evening, Evelyn drove out to Route 47. She hadn't been back since that rainy night in October, hadn't wanted to revisit the place where everything had started. But now, with the case concluded and spring softening the edges of the world, she felt drawn to it. She parked on the shoulder where her tire had blown, got out, and stood in the fading light. The trees were budding now, new leaves unfurling in shades of green so bright they almost hurt to look at. The road was empty, quiet except for birdsong and the whisper of wind through branches. She thought about the woman she'd been that night, controlled, certain, her life ordered into neat compartments. She thought about the fear she'd felt when the tire blew, the helplessness of kneeling in the mud, the relief when headlights appeared in the storm. And she thought about the man who'd stopped, the stranger who'd become something more, not a friend, not even an acquaintance, but a catalyst. A reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life came from nowhere, unplanned and unexpected, asking you to choose between safety and risk. She'd chosen risk. And it had cost her sleepless nights, an ethics investigation, and the certain knowledge that her career hung by a thread for weeks. But it had also given her something invaluable, the understanding that she could trust her own judgment, even when the rulebook said otherwise. A car passed, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk, and Evelyn watched it disappear around the curve. She wondered if the driver would stop if they saw someone stranded, if they'd take the risk of helping a stranger, if they'd even know that such small acts of kindness could change everything. She got back in her car and drove home as the sun set behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. The town square was busy with people enjoying the warm evening, couples walking hand in hand, families with strollers, teenagers laughing on the fountain's edge. Life, continuing in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Back in her apartment, Evelyn made tea and stood by the window looking down at the square. Her phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "How did the review hearing go?" She typed back, "It went well. The family is going to be okay." Claire's response came immediately. "Because of you?" Evelyn smiled. "Because of a lot of things. But I'll take partial credit." She set the phone down and pulled out the photograph Lisa had given her, Caleb and Lily on the swings, both of them airborne and grinning. She looked at it for a long time, memorizing the joy on their faces, the proof that taking a chance had been worth it. Then she put it back in the drawer, next to Caleb's note and all the other small reminders of why she did this work. The next morning she woke early and went for a run through the empty streets, her breath fogging in the cool air, her feet finding a rhythm that felt like meditation. She thought about the cases on her docket for the week ahead. A sentencing, 2 motions, a preliminary hearing. Each one represented a life, a story, a moment where justice would be tested. And she felt ready, not because she had all the answers, not because she'd never make mistakes again, but because she'd learned something essential through the Turner case, that the best judges weren't the ones who never doubted themselves, but the ones who doubted and moved forward anyway, trusting that compassion and integrity would guide them when the rulebook ran out of pages. At the courthouse, Margaret greeted her with coffee and a knowing smile. "You look lighter today." "I feel lighter, like something I've been carrying got set down." "The Turner case?" "Among other things." Evelyn took the coffee gratefully. "What do we have today?" "Sentencing at 9, motion hearing at 11, and your afternoon is clear. Judge Hoffman wants to see you at 2. Evelyn's stomach clenched reflexively, but she pushed the anxiety down. The investigation was over. Whatever Hoffman wanted, it wasn't that. At 2 o'clock, she walked to his chambers and found him at his desk, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him in months. "Evelyn, come in. Close the door." She did, settling into the familiar chair across from him. Hoffman leaned back, fingers steepled. "I wanted to talk to you about something. The chief judge is retiring next year. The position will need to be filled." Evelyn's eyebrows rose. "I didn't know that was public yet." "It's not, but I'm on the selection committee and I wanted to give you a heads up. We'll be looking for someone with integrity, good judgment, and the respect of their colleagues. Someone who understands that justice is both an art and a science." He paused, meeting her eyes. "I think you should apply." For a moment, Evelyn couldn't speak. The chief judge position was the most prestigious in the county, overseeing all the other judges, setting policy, representing the court to the community. It was a job she'd never even considered, assuming it was reserved for people with decades more experience. "Ray, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it. You've proven yourself, Evelyn, not just in spite of the Turner case, but because of it. You showed courage when it would have been easier to play it safe. And the court needs that kind of leadership." After she left his office, Evelyn walked through the courthouse in a daze. Chief Judge. Her. The woman who'd risked her career 6 months ago was now being considered for the most important judicial position in the county. She thought about her father, about what he would say if he were here. She could almost hear his voice. The law is a skeleton. Justice is what gives it flesh. Never forget which one serves the other. She wouldn't. Because she'd learned that lesson the hard way, on a rainy highway and in a crowded courtroom, through sleepless nights and an ethics investigation that could have ended everything. She'd learned that rules existed to serve people, not the other way around. That compassion wasn't weakness, but strength. That sometimes the bravest thing you could do was trust your judgment when everyone else said you were wrong. And she'd learned that justice, when done right, looked like a little girl on a swing set, flying high and fearless, with a father who'd been given a second chance watching her soar. That night, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with a glass of wine and thought about the future. About whether she wanted the chief judge position, with all its responsibilities and pressures. About whether she was ready to lead, to shape policy, to influence how justice was served across the entire county. She thought about the young woman at the legal aid event, thanking her for seeing people instead of case numbers. She thought about James Ortega saying she actually gave a damn. She thought about Lisa Chen calling her decision brave. And she thought about Caleb Turner, standing in the rain, doing what needed to be done because someone needed help. She pulled out her laptop and began typing an email to Judge Hoffman. Ray, thank you for your confidence in me. I would be honored to apply for the chief judge position. I believe justice requires both adherence to law and commitment to humanity, and I would work every day to embody that balance. I've learned that the hardest decisions are often the right ones, and that courage isn't the absence of doubt, but the willingness to act despite it. If given the opportunity to lead, I would bring that same courage to shaping how our court serves this community. I'm ready. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she closed the laptop, finished her wine, and stood by the window looking out at the town she served. Somewhere in those streets, families were having dinner, children were doing homework, parents were reading bedtime stories. Ordinary moments made possible by the extraordinary belief that the system, imperfect as it was, would protect them when they needed protection. And tomorrow, she would wake up and go to court and do her part to honor that belief, to serve justice with integrity and compassion, to remember that behind every case file was a human being deserving of dignity and hope. It had started with a stranger on a rainy highway, a flat tire and an act of kindness, a moment that could have passed without consequence but instead changed everything. And now, standing in her apartment on a spring evening, Evelyn understood that those moments were everywhere. In every courtroom, every hearing, every decision. Moments where you could choose safety or risk, procedure or compassion, the easy path or the right one. She'd chosen risk. She'd chosen compassion. She'd chosen right. And she would keep choosing it every day for as long as she wore the robe. Because that's what justice looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but human. And in the end, that was all any of them could hope to be.